Welcome to Photoshop. This is your instructor, Taz Talley. In this video, I want to provide you with an overview of how to navigate around and use Photoshop. Photoshop is an extremely powerful image editing and design creation tool, but its interface is not particularly intuitive. There are often multiple ways to complete similar tasks, and this can often be quite confusing. And there are some workflow do's and don'ts that you'll want to know, such as using non-destructive editing tools and techniques whenever possible, which will provide you with the greatest creative control and ability to edit your images and designs. By watching and studying this video, I hope you come away with confidence in navigating through and using Photoshop and have a good idea of which Photoshop tools and techniques, such as non-destructive editing functions, you'll want to learn and preferentially use to develop your own Photoshop workflow. I cover quite a bit of ground in this video, so you may want to watch it a couple of times in order to take it all in. Well, let's get started and dive right in. The first time you open Photoshop, you're likely to see this particular screen right here. This is called the home screen. If you're new to Photoshop, this may be the first thing you actually see. If you're an old hand at working in Photoshop and you were working in a previous version, this may be a new window to you. This was added in the last few years as a starting place for working in Photoshop. But there's a standard Photoshop interface, which you'll see you can access here up in the upper left-hand corner where it says PS. When you click on that, it actually goes to the standard Photoshop menu and workspace. And notice the little house that comes up when the PS is gone, so you can go back to the home interface. So you can access either one. You can gain access to Photoshop and open files using either way. I just want to take a couple of minutes to cover some of the functions here in your home screen and your home view, and I really want to focus in the upper left-hand corner here. These file areas down here are primarily for accessing synchronized Lightroom files and also accessing images off the iCloud on the web. So I really want to just cover these basic functions here. Notice that there's a New File button. If you click on New File, you'll get this dialog box here. And this allows you to create your own custom workspace for an image with nothing inside of it, right? Just a blank page, a blank canvas, if you will, where you can designate width and height and linear resolution and color mode. There's some built-in defaults, workspaces, and you can create your own. So you would use this if you were starting for a blank canvas and were going to paint or draw. All right, so that's what you would use that for. We'll go ahead and close that. Then there's the open function. There's a couple of different ways to access images through this interface. One is just clicking on open, and then you'll go to a standard window or Mac interface for opening up a file. For instance, Alaska Light, which is the file we're going to start with. You can select that and then click open. All right, and then it takes you right into the Photoshop interface and opens up that file. The other, and let's go back to this interface, the home interface. If you have images you've been previously working on, some of those images will occur here. For instance, there's that same Alaska Light file. So you can go to the open function, or you can just click here. I find this to be pretty handy, particularly if I'm working with multiple images and combining them on a large project, because all the images I've been working on occur right here. So you can just open up this image just clicking right there. Boom. So it's very nice, very handy. Let's go back. Let's close this. I just want to show you two other things here that relate to learning, because there's some very powerful tools here. One is this Learn function here. If you click on this Learn function, it's going to bring up all these different tutorials in Photoshop. You can spend many hours learning Photoshop tools and techniques here. Let's go back to Home. There's also a function here where you can go Browse Tutorials, and that brings up this dialog box, where you can designate your skill level, what kind of editing or what kind of topics you want to cover. Again, lots and lots of built-in videos for controlling and learning Photoshop controls, tools, and techniques. So let's go back to our home window, and let's just open up our first image that we're going to be working with, which is this Alaska Light image. Before we dig into the Photoshop interface, let's set a few key application-wide Photoshop preferences. That you'll see they're going to just paying attention to a few of these will really make our working in Photoshop a whole lot easier. And preferences in Photoshop typically underneath the Photoshop menu, and you'll see preferences, and then we're going to go to general. There's a lot of preferences here. We're not going to go over all of them, just a few key ones. Notice the keyboard shortcut. There's a lot of keyboard shortcuts built into Photoshop, and it's a Command K on the Mac or Control K on Windows, and that works through a lot of the Adobe applications. That Command or Control K will bring up your general preferences dialog box. So we're going to start here and pay attention to a couple of things here. One of these is this auto show the home screen. If you like the home screen, if this is turned on, which is by default, that home screen that we just looked at a few minutes ago will automatically come up. If not, it just takes you to the regular Photoshop interface. There's not a right way or a wrong way to set that. Set it to however you like. I didn't really like it at first because I was so used to the standard Photoshop interface, but I've come to really like it for the reason that I told you, that it's easy for me to access files that I'm working on current projects. Also, a couple of things to pay attention to here is this right here, resize images during place, and then always create smart objects when placing. As we're going to see, there's multiple ways to bring images into Photoshop. You can copy and paste them. You can drag them from one image to another using the Layers panel, which we're going to do here. But you can also use the File menu and choose the Place command. And that's a really good way to bring in images into Photoshop and create new layers. And if you check both of these on, when you place an image object in Photoshop, it'll automatically give you the ability to resize it when you bring it in, if this is turned on, and it'll automatically create a smart object when you bring it in, which is a very good thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So my recommendation is to turn both of these on. Resize image during place, which gives you the ability automatically to resize an image that you've placed it, which you normally want to do, and then it'll automatically create a smart object, which is one of those non-destructive editing techniques that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's in the General tab. You can take a look at all these, in fact, and you can go through the training in Photoshop and learn what each one of these settings is about. I'm just covering some of the key ones for our workflow and tool use. Okay, underneath interface, you can set up and control your appearance in Photoshop here. There's no right or wrong way, whatever you like here. But one thing I do want to have you pay attention to is the show channels in color. Make sure that's turned off. That way, all your channels will show grayscale values, which is what they actually should show. And third, underneath your workspace, a couple of things to pay attention to here. Most importantly is this open documents and tabs here. I have this turned off. There's two ways that when you open up an image in Photoshop, it appears. One is what I've done here. Notice how I have mine set up this not to open documents and tabs. I just end up with a floating image here. If you have open documents and tabs, every image that you open is opened in a tab, and there's one image that's displayed at a time. So you have a row of tabs up here. That's the default in Photoshop, I believe, these days. And I turn it off because I like to have multiple images up, because particularly when I'm making composites, when I have multiple images open up on screen and I'm moving image elements or compositional elements from one image to another. So there's not a right or a wrong way to do that. But this is just how I have mine set up, so I can have floating images. Notice you can also enable floating documents, enable floating documents during, enable floating document window docking. Whew, that's a mouthful, which means that if you want to dock this image and put it on a tab, you can. I never use tabs, so I just have that turned off. Anyway, there's a lot of other preferences here. You can spend a couple of hours going through all these. And by the way, it's worthwhile doing that. It'll really help orient you towards controlling Photoshop and getting it just the way you want. And you can look up all these preferences in those tutorials that I showed you and learn how to use them. But the ones I'm showing you here are kind of key to the tools and workflows that we're going to be using. All right, let's go ahead and close our preferences, and then we're going to dive into our interface. Oh, there's one other set of preferences I wanted to show you. Let's go back to preferences, and let's come down here to tools. Yeah, a couple of key ones you want to pay attention to here. And this one right here, two really important ones here. Use Shift key for tool switch, and that is, I like to turn that off. That way, if I want to activate like the type tool, right, I just have to type the T key. I don't have to hold down the Shift and the T. Or the Marquee selection tool, just the M. or the W for the magic wand, I don't have to hold down the shift key to access them. So that's just a workflow just enhancement for more efficiency so you can work faster. And this one, really important, zoom resizes window. Make sure that that's turned on. And what this does for you, and when you use keyboard shortcuts or the magnifying glass to enlarge or reduce an image, like you use a command or control plus and minus to enlarge or reduce the size of an image, the window will enlarge and reduce along with the actual image that you're seeing. There's nothing more aggravating to me than magnifying an image and I'm trying to make everything larger, but I have to do the window separately. So I suggest you turn that on. So turn off the use shift key for tool switch and then turn on the zoom resizes window. Okay, let's dive right into looking at the various interface components in Photoshop. And there's basically two fundamental components in Photoshop. There is like so many applications. There are the menus. You've got a whole lot of menus and ways of controlling and creating things in Photoshop. And that's one way to access images and controls and tools in Photoshop. And the other, and the more important one really for Photoshop, are all these panels. And the first time you click on this window, you look at all these panels, you go, holy smokes, there's a lot of panels here. But this is really understanding which panels to use and how to use them is really the key for controlling images in Photoshop, creating and editing images in Photoshop. One of the things that's confusing that I mentioned early on in the introduction is that there's a lot of functions that you can access both through panels and through menus. And if you've done it one way and then you find that same controller function in another, there's a lot of duplication. But the rule of thumb here is if you can control it using a panel, that's what you want to do. And as we go along, you'll see why that's true. It's a lot easier, it's a lot faster, and a lot more centralized access to controls and functions. So menus and panels, and you use the window menu to access all of your panels. So where do we get started with our panels? Well, let's start with the three most fundamental panels that you want to make sure that you have access to. Let's go all the way down to the bottom of the list here. The application frame, the options, and the tools. These three you want to have turned on pretty much all the time. What is the application frame? The application frame is this dark area behind us here. So notice if I turn this off, I see everything that's behind, all right? Whereas if we turn this on, the application frame, we have a nice blank workspace to work with. Notice if you go back and forth to the frame, like we've just done, notice how our image occurs as a tab, all right, which can be a little bit annoying. But if that happens, you can just drag it down and it floats again, all right? But I suggest that you use the application frame. Old-time Photoshop users who weren't used to the frame didn't like it when it first came out. I didn't either, because it was something else, something new. But boy, I sure like it now because it really simplifies visually my workspace and it takes away a lot of color, a lot of clutter. In my Photoshop workspace. So I like to have that turned on. You definitely want to have options and tools. Tools, this is the basic tool panel. All right, it's one of the fundamental tool panels where you access a lot of different creation, editing functions, selection tools, type tools, gradient tools, and then the options and tools go hand in hand. Let me show you. Let's just move this. This is the basic tool panel up here. Notice when I click on the lasso tool, I end up with one set of options up here. All right. When I click on the type tool, another whole set of options related to the type tool. When I click on the crop tool, it's crop functions and so forth. So as I move from one tool to another, we end up with different options for controlling this tool. While we're here, I'm just going to go ahead and mention that there's little tick marks beside each tool here, like the eyedropper tool. When you click and hold on this, you'll see that there's multiple tools for each one of these. All right? Like in the type tool, for instance, you click and hold, you end up with multiple type tools. So every one of these tools has multiple tools underneath it you can choose from, and every one has its own set of option functions that you see up here. So you always want to have these three tools open, the application frame, the options, and the tools. And if you select a tool, you don't see options up here, just come over to the window and make sure that your options function is turned on. All right, so those are the three most fundamental ones. All right. What you might want to do at this point is just pause the video and just kind of experiment with this tool palette here. Just click on some of these, look at some of the options, And look at the multiple tools that are available to you. Maybe take 10, 15 minutes and just really explore this tool palette that you see here. And look at the options that come up here to become very familiar with selecting a tool and then finding the options that go with it. So take 10 to 15 minutes, do that, and then come back and resume the video. As I mentioned previously, there are a number of Photoshop tools and functions that are available in multiple places, both in menus and in panels, and again, that can be a bit confusing. I want to just cover some of the functions that you work with in Photoshop that you'll primarily use from the image menu. And one of these is mode, is choosing the mode in which you're working. Grayscale, index color, RGB, CMYK color. You can edit these in other places, but this is the primary place that you'll be changing the basic mode of the image in which you're working, and also the bit depth. And if you're opening raw images, you're capturing and editing in raw, which I highly recommend because you have more data to work with, this is where you'll see the advanced or expanded bit depth of images. Some other functions, image size, which brings up the image size dialog box, in which you can control the width and height in inches or pixels, the linear resolution. It's something you'll primarily do through the image menu. And notice there are built-in keyboard shortcuts here, like Command-Option or Control-Alt-I for image size, Command-Option-C or Control-Alt-C for the canvas size, which you can control and add to the outside borders of the increase the canvas size of your image. Both of these functions are typically things you'll access here, but you can use keyboard shortcuts to do it. You can also perform, and you primarily perform, image rotation here. Another function that you very often use is rotation of your image, which if you create, for instance, if you come in here, you do a select all, and you come underneath edit, and when you have something that you can transform, such as a selection, you choose free transform. This is something you primarily do here, but it's a keyboard shortcut that I'm going to encourage you to learn right off the bat. Command on Mac, Control T on Windows for accessing the transform function. It's something you use a lot of time for resizing or rotating images or image elements on layers. So there's some of the things that you will access primarily through Windows or through keyboard shortcuts. So just to save you time, some of these things, such as free transform, such as image size, such as canvas size, learn those keyboard shortcuts, and then you can just immediately access these controls that you would typically do through the menus. You can just use through keyboard shortcuts. It's worth mentioning here that underneath the edit menu, all the way down at the bottom, you can create your own keyboard shortcuts. I'm not going to go through it here. It's a separate training video, but I want to point out where it is. So in case you'd like to get started in that, and I'm going to show you one of mine that I have used since the 80s, and that is the duplicate function. It doesn't come with a keyboard shortcut, but I created one using, again, this editing function down here to create your own keyboard shortcuts. I've used F10 to duplicate images, which I do all the time on screen. So I made my own keyboard shortcut working in Photoshop just to simplify that function. So most of these menu controls that I have here, I either use the built-in keyboard shortcuts in Photoshop, such as the image and the image size and canvas size, or my own keyboard shortcuts such as F10 for duplicate. Many other functions in Photoshop, such as what we see underneath the layers panel here, layers, duplicate layer, new fill layer, new adjustment layer, all these adjustment layers, layer mask, vector mask, smart objects. These are all things that can be controlled through the layer menu. But as you can see, it's a big menu and there's lots of subparts to it, and it can be time consuming to have to go and use all these things. You don't need it. I rarely have ever used the layer menu because if we go underneath window here, and I'm going to take you after these first three here, the application frame, option and tools, the very most important menu. In fact, the most important panel, not menu, but panel in Photoshop is this one right here. This is the layers panel. Notice it's so important, it gets its own keyboard shortcut built right in. F7, learn it, use it to always bring up the layers panel. And when I bring up the layers panel, oh, and notice this, that the properties panel came up right with it. I'm just going to move this off, and we'll come back to that in just a second. I'll show you how important that one is. It's the second most important panel in Photoshop. But I just want to focus on the layers panel right now. everything that you have here underneath the layers menu, all right, you're going to have right here in the layers panel. Notice that you've got a menu up here. Every single panel has its own pop-up menu. When you click here, new layer, duplicate layer, new group, artboard, mask objects, convert to smart objects, all the things we saw over here, you're either underneath the menu or down at the bottom. Remember those adjustment layers I just showed you? Boom, all right here, creating masks right here. So you can access all those controls right through this floating layer panel. You don't have to be mousing around all the time. So the layers panel, the key panel inside of Photoshop, that's where we're going to add all of our elements, our type, our images. We're going to control layer stacking. This is really the core. This is the really the nexus of everything that we're going to create and edit inside of Photoshop, the layer menu. And you just don't need to go to the layer panel. You don't need to go to the layer menu to access almost all of those functions. Same thing applies to type. You know, there's a type menu in which you can control type, but there's also type panels, such as character panels. When you bring up the character panel, it actually is a double panel where character and paragraph control, right? Which is easier and faster than using the type menu, but I'm going to show you something even better than that, all right? I don't even use the panel. I use something else. More on that later. But the basic idea that I'm driving at here is if you can do it through a panel, use the panel. And almost, I would say 80 to 85% of the functions you're going to be using can be going right through the layers panel. All right, so let's just go right back and take a look at it. I'm just going to Command D to deselect the image. I just want to take a minute just to talk about the layers panel and what comes up here. When you open up a new image like we just did, this Alaska light image, it comes in with the background. So that's your first layer. So when you open up an image, like you're taking it off your digital camera, you're going to have a background layer. That's the starting layer, and then we're going to add other things to this. But before we do this, I want to add in and combine group, our second most important menu, which I've already mentioned to you, right? And that's the properties panel. You'd never know it just by looking at this list, but this is super important. So I'm going to bring up the properties panel. You might remember when I brought up the layers panel initially, the properties panel was stuck on. Well, there's a reason for that, because I've grouped them together. All right? And as you're going to see, when you click on anything in the layers panel, all right, you're going to have control of whatever you click on inside the properties panel. So I always want my properties panel to be with my layers panel, and this is how you do it. This is how you group them. Take the properties panel and then move it up right next to the bottom, and then just snug it up a little bit, and you'll notice that little blue line occurs. Do you see that little blue line? All right. Ooh, as soon as that blue line occurs, release, and then whenever you move the layers panel, the properties panel goes right with it. And even if you close the layers panel, the properties panel closes. And when you bring the layers panel up, do you remember the keyboard shortcut? Yep, F7, remember that. All right, the properties panel will come right up with it. So I always group those two together, and these are always up on screen, almost regardless of what I'm doing in Photoshop, because everything goes through layers. And notice when I click on the background, the properties for that background layer comes up here. And notice there's lots of things you can control here, grids and guides. You can actually change the mode right here. Remember, I mentioned that typically we do that through the menu, but you can actually do it here. Control canvas size. So whatever we click on, the control for that element is going to occur right here. We'll see that more as we go along. Panels that you like to work with together. For instance, the colors panel and the brushes panel. If you are a painter or you draw, you want your colors and your brushes together, you can do just what I've done here with layers and properties. When I do color correction, if you take my color correction class, you'll see that I have histograms and info panel always grouped together because I always use them together for evaluating and adjusting images. So as you develop your own Photoshop workflow and have your own favorite panels that you work in, give some thought to, I like those two together all the time, and create your panel groups. All right, now that we've got a general introduction to the interface of Photoshop, menus, panels, tools, controlling options for the tools, and we know we're going to be focusing on layers. Anything we can do through panels, we're going to do it through there. Now I'd like to do is a little project to kind of show you how all this works together and also teach you some tools, particularly some non-destructive editing tools. Let's make our first composite image in Photoshop in this next part. And I want to show you one of the functions that I always use. Say if I open this image, this is going to be the image that I want to use. One of the first things that I do is I go my command or control and I go minus minus and I make this image small right up here. I put it in the upper left-hand corner. All right. And I mentioned earlier non-destructive image editing. Always focus, whenever possible, do things non-destructive. And one of the things that I do, I've always done this from the beginning, is I never work on the original image. So here's the Alaska Light. Notice how I've named it Alaska Light-original. I'm going to create a working file. All right, and to do that, I'm going to go Image. Remember my keyboard shortcut I told you I made? Duplicate, F10 that I created myself. And then here we go. And we're just going to create this and a new file. And we're going to call this Working. All right, and I'm going to click OK. All right, and we're going to create a working file. And that leaves by duplicating, rather than doing a save as, see, it creates a new image and brings it up on screen. That's the advantage of duplicate. Leaves the original image on screen. Why do I do that? Well, one, I make it smaller so I can keep an eye on it. And then I love to use this original image as, one, a protected image, and two, as a CNC, as a compare and contrast. So as I work on this image, I can always visually compare it back to the original image. So it's very handy. It's just something I do with every single image. And if for some reason I screw up and I damage this image over here, my working image, I can always go back to my original. So it's both a safety and a compare and contrast capability that this gives me. While we're here, since we've created this image, understand this image is just created in RAM, right? It's not actually saved to the hard drive. So let's go ahead and save this new image while we're here. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Remember, Save As creates a new image, but it closes the one that's on screen. I'm just going to click Save, which is going to save this image that we have just created. In this dialog box, if you're not used to the new versions of Creative Cloud applications, they're always trying to send you to the cloud, saving things to the cloud, which is not a bad thing. But if you just take a look here, you go click Save, boom, it's going to save it to the cloud, the iCloud. And then all your images end up off of your computer. If that's what you want, fine. I don't like that. I like to work off of my computer and save things to the cloud as I want to use them. So you need to be aware of this dialog box. Lots of people think that they're saving it to the computer when they're actually saving it to the cloud. See, save to Creative Cloud. That's on the internet. So my suggestion is be very clear as to where you're saving your files, and see on your computer, it's the secondary choice here, all right? Because Adobe wants you to work on their cloud. Well, I don't want to work on their cloud. I want to work on my computer. So I'm saving all my files. And a lot of my files are big. I work with multi-gigabyte files sometimes, and I don't need to be working on those over the internet, all right? So just be aware of that. I'm going to put it on my computer rather than saving it to the Creative Cloud. I'm going to click on the computer. And then a word about file formats here is that, notice this original image is a JPEG. I can't do anything about that. So first, I recommend to you strongly, if you're a photographer, you're working in Photoshop and you want the highest possible images, capture your images in RAW. And then we're going to save your raw files out as working .psd files. If you capture this as JPEGs, as this image has been, it's automatically been compressed and the image quality is somewhat reduced depending upon what kind of JPEG you created. Well, in this case, it's a starting JPEG. I can't do anything about it, but what I can do is arrest any further image degradation. So I'm going to save this as a .psd file, right? A .photoshop file. Notice the .psd. This is a native Photoshop file function. And there's no compression here, and it gives you full functionality and faster working inside of Photoshop. So we're going to save this file out. The original one's a JPEG. Again, can't do anything about that, but I'm going to save this out as a .psd file. So don't just merely click Save and save it again as a JPEG. Slow down long enough so you have a .psd file. And by the way, this function here is part of my workflow. Anytime I see a dash or underscore working, I know that's a working Photoshop file, and it's one that I can and should be editing. Versus a file that's called -original, then I know that's an original file that I may open it, but I'm immediately going to do a duplicate and save it out as a Photoshop file. So there we go. So we've duplicated our image. We have a working CNC version, and we have a working Photoshop file. It's no longer going to lose any image quality. And then as we move through our editing functions, we're going to preserve as much image quality as possible. All right, so we're going to make our first composite image. We're going to add something to Photoshop. Let's start by adding a type layer to Photoshop. All right. And to do that, we just come down here and select the type tool. And remember, when you click and hold, you can see there's multiple type tools. We're just going to start off with the basic one. Remember, you can just press the T key, because remember our preferences, we turned off the need to hold down the Shift key. So we can just press T, it activates the type tool. And then whatever your foreground color is, that's the color that your type will start out as. Totally editable at any point. But you could set your foreground color first, as I've done here. I've set it as white. And then that's going to be the color, the initial color of your type. So just select the type tool, select whatever color you want, and you can change the color by just clicking on it. And then you can change assign a different color here if you want to. And then click anywhere in your image. Typically, you want to click somewhere close to where you'd like the type to be. So I always like to use negative space when I place my type. I try to avoid setting type on top of complex image areas, because then both the visibility of the underlying image and the readability of the type suffer. So I've chosen an image with some nice negative space, and I'm just going to click, and then watch what happens over in the layers panel when I click. Boom, automatically a type layer is created. And then you have something called Greeking. This is called Greek type. It just puts in some regular type just as a placeholder for you. All right, and then you can start typing. All right, so we're going to type Alaska Light, all right? And notice it creates a type line and then sets type along that line. And when you get done typing what you want, and you can decide you want all caps, upper and lowercase. I'm a big fan of upper and lowercase characters on words because it enhances readability. When you get it the way you like it, then just hit the Enter key. A lot of functions when you assign them, like type or scaling or rotating, transforming, when you get done with it, you hit the Enter key and then it applies it. And notice that now we have a type layer. And I mentioned that everything goes through, everything we add comes into the type layer. So you think of this type layer as being a third dimension. All right, we're looking in 2 dimensions here, but this Alaska Light is on a layer that's not above the background layer. This is called layer stacking. All right, so think of this in 3 dimensions. All right, length and width, and then this is the height. All right, that we're adding images, or in this case, type onto our image. All right, once you place your type, you can edit that type, you can move the type, and the easy way to move the type is there's this move tool right here. You can click on that and then come up here and click and move it. Just make sure that you're on the type layer. You select the type layer, you can move it around. All right, but you can also, I can stay in my type layer. I can be in whatever tool that I want to be. All right, I could be in a Marquee tool. If I hold down my Command key, so long as I'm not actually editing the type, and it automatically brings up the move tool. All right, hold down the Command key, Control key on Windows, and it automatically allows you to move any element around that you want. Just again, make sure that you've activated the type layer that's added. All right, and then you can move it around. All right? So that's kind of a nice, handy keyboard shortcut to know, is being able to just hold down the Command or Control key and click and drag. All right. To move any element around that you have on the particular layer. All right. The other keyboard shortcut that you'll want to learn is space and then Command or space and Control. That allows you to bring up your magnifying glass, and you can click and drag, and you can zoom in and out while you click and drag like this. That's a really handy function. And the other one is that once you zoom in like this, if you just hold down the space bar, then it becomes a page grabber hand. All right. So space bar is the page grabber hand, and space and the Command or Windows key allows you to zoom in and out. All right. So and you might want to just stop for a few minutes, stop the video, and just kind of practice that for navigating around. And I'll give you one more thing to kind of play with, and that is underneath the view menu, where you can zoom in and out, the Command plus and minus, Control plus and minus, really handy. And there's also the fit on screen and 100%. These are Command 0 and Command 1. And 0, think of 0 as the whole screen, and then 1 is at 100%. Really worthwhile just kind of playing with these. So Command 0 will take me to full screen, which goes outside of my video screen. I'm going to go Command minus. all right, or control minus to bring my image back inside. So just play with one of those a little bit. Command plus, minus, minus. Remember in our preferences, we set the window to zoom with the image. Now it's paying off those big benefits that we talked about. So this is a really easy way to navigate through the Photoshop interface using some of these keyboard shortcuts. All right. So stop, take a few minutes to use some of these. Command and Control, move your elements around. Command Control plus and minus, or Command spacebar command to zoom in and out, or just the spacebar to bring up the page grabber hand. All of these are tools that you can select down here. Like there's the hand tool, and then there's the selection tool. But it's just a faster and easier way to navigate through Photoshop. Okay, so once we have our type layer, then we can double click to select this, and we can control the type. Now notice there's multiple ways to control our type. Here, remember, since we're in the type tool, we have our choice of, we can control our fonts here, we can control our font styles here, we can control our point size, we can control the amount of anti-alias, right? We can also use the character panels, all right, and paragraph panels to get the same kind of control. But honestly, I don't use either one of those. Why? Because I don't need to. You don't either. Because notice, since we have selected, we have grouped our properties panel with our layers panel, as soon as we click on type, look at this. All the type controls are right here. All the paragraph controls, all the type options are available here. Everything that is in any of these panels, the options panel or in the type panels, are right here underneath the properties panel. And so no need to go to all those other ones. And just having the properties panels keeps your workspace clean and clear. You don't have those extra panels. Don't have to move all the way up here. That's why I mentioned earlier, you've got multiple ways you can do things, but here the best way is just using the properties panel. So whatever we click on, and again, remember, whatever you click on, the controls for that automatically come up underneath properties. So when I pick up my click on my background layer, I end up with background layer controls. When I click on my type layer, I end up with all my type controls. So this is really how you want to control things. So if I double click on here, select my type, and I can come down here and I can say, oh, I'd like that, let me try that at 30, and then I hit my enter key and go, oh, that's too big, right? And then notice that if I come down here, I can just choose, say, 25, all right? I don't even have to select the type. I can just control it right through there and control the font size. There we go. Nice. All right. And then just hit the enter key when you're done and good to go. Hold down my control key. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of place my type where I want it. I'm going to place a little bit asymmetrically. I don't like type right in the middle of my image. I like asymmetrical design because I'd like to put my elements a little bit off center because it creates a little bit more dynamic composition. It helps move the eye around the image, creates a sense of more three dimensions, making your design more three-dimensional, more active. Okay, what else can we do with type? Let me just show you a couple of things that we can do here. One is we can come and we can double click to the right on the right side of the type layer, and it brings up layer styles. And a layer style is, there's all sorts of different layer styles in here. Bevel and emboss, contour, stroke, inner shadow, inner glow, satin. Boy, can you have fun. Word of caution here, it's easy to overdo layer styles. And layer styles work on images as well as type. Let me just show you one simple one, how this works. I'm going to choose a drop shadow. And notice that all these dialog boxes have previews. So you'll turn on the preview or off, and it'll show you actually, what the preview of that drop shadow is going to be. So that's very handy. And then if you click on, here we just activated, here when you click on drop shadow, then you get controls over that whole shadow, what the blending mode is, what the angle. So notice as I change the angle, and watch up on the image, right, it changes the angle at which that drop shadow is created. And you can control distance, spreading, size, quality. You can control the color of it. You control the blending mode and the opacity, all right, of your drop shadow. So full control. Spend some time. You might want to stop here, stop the video, and kind of play with some of these layer styles. I'm just going to add a simple drop shadow here. But I want to remind you, you can really overdo it. And particularly on drop shadows, don't have them big and bold. And drop shadow should be kind of almost secondary in terms of visual. It shouldn't be grabbing a lot of attention. So anyway, so we're going to add a drop shadow here. And notice that all of this is non-destructive editing. All right, I can edit my type at any time by using my properties panel, and you can turn the visibility of the type layer off and on by clicking here. Anytime I want to change this drop shadow, I can just double click on it and it brings up the drop shadow. I can add or subtract any functions that I want. Completely non-destructive editing. All right. Two other things to kind of talk about here when you have a layer, in this case we'll use type, is there are blending modes and opacity. Again, all of this is controlled through the layers panel. I think I mentioned you can control these things other places, but why? Why do it, right? So here, underneath blending modes, again, we have a whole array of different blending modes, and you can select them, and they'll, as you go through them, they'll give you previews of what's happening, of what they will do when you actually apply them. So color dodge, linear dodge, and some of them have no impact because of the nature of the compositional element. But overlay, soft light, hard light. I like the soft light, you know, because this is kind of a subtle image. It's got a subtle look and feel to it. So rather than just having that big bold type, I'm going to go with soft light. All right. So I'm going to click soft light, and notice how it blends that type in with the background, and the background starts to show through a little bit. But I'm thinking, you know, I'd like to maybe get the background coming through a little bit more. That's where I can go up here and choose opacity. All right, so I'm going to come here and I can drag this, and maybe I'll just go maybe 95, 85, something like that. Somewhere in the 85 to 90. There, I like that. And again, at any point I can say, I want to pump that up a little bit. Take it up to 89 or 90%. All of it's completely non-destructive editing. Nothing is applied to this file until I flatten the image and save it out as something else like a JPEG, but never, ever flatten the only Photoshop file that you have here. And when I say flatten, I'm talking about this function here, where you choose flatten or merge layers, merge visible. Always work on a copy of this Photoshop file. Keep the original Photoshop file as is. All right, so we've added a type layer, we've edited it, we added layer effects, we did blending modes, and we controlled opacity. All key functions, and notice, all done through the layers panel and or its buddy, the properties panel. Okay, next for our compositing project, since we added a type layer and modified the type and edited that, let's add an image, because that's the other kind of key component that you'll be adding to, a compositional element you'll be adding to your composite images in Photoshop. And I want to show you kind of two different ways of doing things, kind of the difficult way, the more intuitive way in many ways, but then I want to show you the better way. Once you've done it the kind of longer, more intuitive way, the faster way will make a lot of sense. All right, so first, let's open up an image that we'd like to add to this Alaska light. So let's come underneath our file menu and go open, Command or Control O to bring up this dialog box, and we're going to add this fishing boat image, and then click open. And you can go back to the home menu if you would like to and do it that way. All right, and then let's just make this a little bit smaller. Command minus. Remember, now we're paying those big benefits, right, of setting up those preferences so that the image window gets resized along with the image. All right, so kind of to describe what's going on here in terms of Photoshop and layers. Notice we bring up the fishing boat image. Here's the layers panel for that. All right, and there's the background image, the boat. Notice if we click on the Alaska light image, the layers for that come up. All right, so as you select one image to another, the layer panel changes because you're reading different files. What we're going to do here, kind of the manual way to show you, is I'm just going to take this background layer and I'm just going to drag it over here. I could also do a copy and paste. I could select all and do a copy and paste. You'll end up with the same thing basically. And I'm going to drag this over here and just kind of place it near the middle of the image. All right. Now notice that this comes in and a new layer is automatically created, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, is call this, the boat image. All right. And you want to get in the habit of naming all your layers logically, no doubt about it. Now, we've talked about non-destructive editing. If I now start editing this image dimensionally, like changing the dimension, the size, the rotation, it's going to be working with the pixels that I've got, and the image starts to degrade. Here's where the concept of using smart layers comes in. If I convert this boat layer to a smart layer by doing this, come down here and convert to smart object, you get that little icon right there. And what happens is it links this image here in the Alaska Light image to the original image that I just brought it over from. And then any dimensional adjustments that I make here will automatically go, Photoshop will go back to the original file, retrieve the original pixels to help do any dimensional adjustments. All right. And that way you maintain as much quality as possible. So you can resize, reshape as much as you want to your heart's delight, but you'll get no reduction in image quality. All right, let's move our layers panel over here a little bit because I want to I'm going to just make this a little bit larger as you see here. All right. And I want to click on this and I want to do a select all. All right. All right. So you can see there's the edge of the image and I'm just moving my my visibility out to the edge here, Command D. I'm increasing the visibility past the edge of the image, all right, to deselect. Now I've moved this image in here and I've created a smart object. This is when we can do this. We can come down here and choose Free Transform, Command T or Control T, all right? And when you do that, what's pointed out is something you really didn't immediately recognizes, oh, this placed image that we brought in is larger than the receiving image. And you didn't really see that because it was a smart object until you actually went to the transform tool. And we're going to the transform tool because we're working with a smart object, and transform tools work very well there. So what we might do here then is click and drag, all right, and bring retransform this image so that it all fits right inside the Alaska Light. I can make it larger, smaller, whatever I want to do. All right, but because it's a smart object, it's going to be pulling pixels from this original image. And then I can click OK. All right. So now you see what we've done. We brought an image, we linked it back to the original image, we did a transform, we resized it. All right. So it's a bit of a complicated process, right? So what I'd like to do is show you the easy way to do this. And we've already set it up in the preferences that we set earlier. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Option or Alt click on the trash can, which allows me to just throw that layer away. All right. And I'm going to keep this image just for reference. And instead of opening the image and going to the layers panel and dragging it across, I'm going to activate this image here, the Alaska Light, make sure that one's the one that's active. And you can tell by looking at the layers panel, right? And I'm going to come underneath File, and I'm going to do one of the two places. Remember the the preference we set? We said that if we bring in a place file, two things. One, it'll automatically create a smart object, and two, it'll automatically allow us to resize the image once we place it. Both of those things we set in preferences, all right? And we have an option here. We can, when we place it, it can link it back to the original file, or we can just embed a copy of this file in the working file. This is almost always my choice. That way, no matter where I move this file, the embedded copy is already. Does it make my file size larger? Yeah. Do I care? No. All right, because every one of I'll end up with some pretty big files, but it's okay. But it's a choice. It's not a right or a wrong way to do it. I just choose to use it in case, because I move my files around a fair amount during my workflow. So I'm going to choose Place Embedded, and then I'm going to choose that fishing boat image, the same one, and choose Place, and watch what happens. Do you see that? It automatically brings the file in, transforms it so that it fits, the width fits inside of the Alaska Light image. All right? So I don't have to go through all that. Now notice that there's the layer right there, right? And it actually adds the name of the file, Fishing Boat Sunrise, to that layer, so it automatically names it. Now watch this. When I hit my Enter key to apply the transform, boom, you can see that it's automatically a smart layer. That's the way to bring files into Photoshop, all right? But it was all controlled through that preference that we set up earlier, where we set the preference to automatically resize, which transforms the file automatically, and creates a smart layer all at the same time. So I showed you the long way so you could see conceptually what's happening, but really you want to use the place command. That's the most powerful and the most time-saving. Okay, now that we've brought our second image in, and I showed you how to use the place command, and that's really the best way to go because everything happens more automatically. Automatically scales that image through a transform and creates a smart layer, and names the layer for me. Ta-da! Now, let's say that we want to edit this. All right, and our objective here is to get these two images to blend together and be part of one another. All right, so we've placed the boat. And now we want to kind of position the boat. And the way to do this is you can just hold down, the command or control key and bring up the move tool, and that allows you to move the image anywhere you want to. Notice that if I don't go to the move tool, and actually select the move tool, it gives me the ability to move the object around, all right? But if I just want to move it horizontally or vertically, I can actually go to the move tool, press the V key, which selects the move tool over here. If I hold down my shift key, I can only move it horizontally or vertically, all right? The good thing is with these smart guides that are built into Photoshop now, is that if you just go to the move tool just using the command key, right? It'll automatically stay within those smart guides unless you actively push it outside of it, which is very nice. Okay, so I'm just going to move my object down here, the boat down a little bit, because I'm thinking I want this in the lower portion of the image. All right, there we go. So I'm going to place it. Again, everything is completely non-destructive here. It's a smart layer. If I dimensionally resize this again, I'm still good to go. All right, so what I would like to do is I'd like to control the visibility and blending of this file. And normally in the first lesson that you're going to work with in Photoshop, you can talk about using selection tools, basic selection tools. So that's what we'll start with here. I'm going to go to the Marquee tool here, which is over here. It's the rectangular Marquee tool. There's multiple Marquee tools here. We'll just start with the rectangular Marquee tool. And let's go up here into our options panel. Remember, whatever tool you select here, you get the options here. It has a feather of 0. Now, you may want to actually assign a feather here or not. Typically, I just start with 0 and then I'll control the feather later. And that's what I'm going to do here because I want to show you how the feather works. And I'm thinking, I don't want all of this sky here. I want some of it because there's a nice gradient here, which is going to help this image blend in with this one. But I don't need this top section here, so I want to get rid of it. And I might want to get rid of some of the bottom of this file as well. So I'm just going to take my Marquee tool, right? And I'm just going to draw it about where I want it to go. Because I don't want all the bottom, I don't want all the top, all right? And if you don't like what you've got, you can just start over, right? You can say, I really want a little bit less and a little bit more, or whatever you want, all right? However that's going to fit in. All right, so I've started with the basic Marquee tool. Now, when you learn basic tools, you say, well, I want to get rid of the rest of the image, so I might invert it and then delete. Don't do it. Don't do it. After you come up with a basic selection, you want to convert that selection into something called a mask. In this case, we're going to make a layer mask. Because it's non-destructive editing. Anytime you make a selection, you hit the delete key to remove pixels, boom, that's destructive editing. And you don't need to do that. All right? So you start with a basic selection tool, in this case, a very basic tool, just the Marquee tool. And then we're going to convert this selection into a mask. Right? And to do this, as you progress and get a little bit more sophisticated in making masks, you'll probably use this function here, the select and mask, which brings up a very powerful set of selection and mask tools, right? But for today, I'm going to show you how to access that. But for today, we're going to start simply. And again, where are we going? Our layers panel, of course, because we can create a mask by just clicking on this function right here. See this little icon? If you let your your mouse hover over there, it'll say, add layer mask. All right. Now watch what happens when I click here. Remember, we started with just a basic selection. Then the first thing we do after that basic selection is we create a mask. All right. And notice what gets added to the layers panel here and linked to the image. And notice that the upper portion of this image is no longer visible. That's because the white area here is the visible area and the black area is the invisible. All right. Now, notice we can actually take a look at this mask. I'm going to hold down my Alt key, Option in Mac, and click on it, and we'll actually see the layer mask in our main view window here. Notice the hard edge that we've got here. All right, that's because we started with a feather of 0. So we have a hard edge on our layer mask. This is visible, that's invisible. Think of this as a digital stencil, if you will, where this is the cutout area and that's the opaque area. And that's basically what a layer mask is. All right. Now, I can edit this edge manually, or I can come down here and lo and behold, we've clicked on our layer mask and look what we see. Control for properties for the layer mask. Well, look at that, all right? Now, nice thing here is I can still edit the layer mask while looking at my image, all right? I can still look at the layer mask and edit the layer mask by looking at my image, by clicking on the image, activating the image view, and then just clicking over here again on the layer mask. Remember, I held out my Option key, Alt, and when I clicked on here to actually bring up the layer mask in this view. So if you activate the layer view and then just click on your layer mask, then you have layer mask properties here. And then you can control the density, the overall density or opacity of the image, of the layer mask, through the image through the layer mask, or let's just do something simple. Let's control the feather. Remember, we did a 0 feather up here, so we start out with a hard edge. Now watch what happens to this edge as I pull my feather over. And see how that edge feathers right up like there? See how I'm controlling the feather of that edge? And watch this, I'm going to go back, Alter, Option to click on, and you can see what happens to the layer mask. All right, and that's how it's controlling the blending of that edge. All right, and then let's just go back over here and then just click on the layer mask to edit the layer mask, and then I have complete control over what that looks like. All right, so I can go up here, go all the way to about 35 to get a nice smooth gradient edge of that layer mask. I haven't removed 1 pixel from here. All the original pixels are there. I'm just controlling the feathering. Notice that I can go to the Selecting Mask tool by clicking right here, and it brings up a whole set of tools that you can use for creating and editing your layer mask. I'm just showing you the fundamentals here so you get the idea of what a layer mask is. This is non-destructive control of visibility and blending using a layer mask to do that. And at any point, you can use your layers panel to create the mask here, and then go to Select and Mask, or you can go to Select and Mask underneath the Select menu. Whatever method you want to use, and then control that layer mask, the basic functions through density and feather right here in the Properties panel, or go into the full set of controls by going into the Select and Mask. All right, so there we go. And remember, at any point here, all right, at any point, I can decide, now that I've controlled the feathering a little bit, I'd like to move the image down even maybe a little bit more. I just go to my Command key, or I activate the Move tool here, right? Hold down the Shift key so it just moves horizontally, so I can control the placement at any time. The layer mask moves with it because it's linked, all right? So very cool. Non-destructive editing throughout. Everything that we've done so far is non-destructive editing. All right, so the image is starting to blend a little bit. This image still looks pretty separate from this one up here though, right? The color balance is different, the contrast is different, so let's do something about that. Let's go back up here, I'm going to select my image layer, all right? And then let's go to, and I liked that soft light before, and notice that the color dodge way too saturated. Let's go to the soft light and see if that helps. Boy, it sure does, right? This helps blend that image. We're letting some of the background show through. And so they're really creating a nice overall blending of this image with the background. And just like we did with our type, if I want to reduce the opacity some as well, I can go down here and go, maybe about 85%, all right, for my opacity. All right, so I can blend it, adjust the opacity. Now I'm starting to get a really nice blended version of my image. Once again, at any point I can come back here, right, and I can control the placement of my fishing boat. And as I increase the amount of blending that I have here, I'm probably going to want to fine tune exactly where that placement is. Anything else I can do? You betcha. And I want to show you one more fundamental image editing tool that's non-destructive, and they're called adjustment layers, and specifically adjustment layers applied as clipping masks, all right? But before we do this, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my type layer, and I'm just going to drag it up here. So you can change the stacking order of your layers by just clicking and dragging. I typically like to have my type up top, unless I actually want it to occur behind an image, and that just keeps the layer stacking clean. In case if I move this element up here, it'll be underneath the type rather than on top of it. But if I want the type to occur behind it, I can by just adjusting the layer stacking. All right, and as we go along, of course, you always want to do a save, right? Command S or Control S to save the image as we go along. And after every function, you'll probably want to do that. Otherwise, everything just occurs in RAM. All right, one other thing that we want to do here, and that is let's do some adjustment layers to fine tune the overall look and feel of this image layer here. So I'm going to select my boat layer, And again, I don't have to go to my type, my layer menu to go to my adjustment layers. I just click here, and first adjustment layer I'm going to make is a curves adjustment layer. All right, and I'm going to use this to control overall brightness. So I'm actually going to select that. I'm going to call this the B and C for brightness and contrast, because I'm just going to work with the master channel here. I can use this for color correction if I want to by adjusting red, green, and blue channels, but here I'm just going to do an overall brightness and contrast adjustment. And I want to brighten this a little bit to kind of match some of the brightness up here. So I add this adjustment layer, but notice that if I just add the adjustment layer and I lighten and darken, do you see how it does both images, both the background image and the boat image, the Alaska light image and the boat image? I don't want that. I just want to lighten this image. This is where the clipping mask comes in. Select my adjustment layer, the B and C, brightness and contrast, and come down here and create clipping mask. Notice there's a keyboard shortcut. You're going to learn it, all right? The Command Option G for clipping mask, and it moves the adjustment layer off to the right, all right? Now watch what happens as I lighten and darken the image. It just applies it to the boat image, all right? So you've learned the two key tools that we're going to be using in this course to create composite images. One, layer mask for controlling visibility and blending non-destructively, and then clipping mask controlled adjustment layers, which are adjustment layers offset to the right in the layers panel that allow you to control the tone and color of each layer independently and separately from all the rest. All right. So here, what I would like to do is kind of overall lighten the layer just a little bit. Okay? I do it visually to suit. But you know, the saturation of this layer is still a little bit high based upon the reduced saturation of this layer. So now I could work with the colors, but there's a real simple tool here to use to adjust saturation. Let's make another adjustment layer here and come down here and choose the hue saturation layer. And notice that since the first layer is applied as a clipping mask, when I choose hue saturation, it's automatically applied as a clipping mask as well. And then I'll just come down here to the saturation, and I'm just going to diminish. See, if I raise the saturation, the image looks more separate. As I lower the saturation a little bit, it fits in a little bit better with the overall undersaturated image up here. So here I've controlled the brightness and I've controlled the saturation. And if at any point I decide, oh, you know, I'd like to maybe fine tune, you know, the opacity, maybe I bring the opacity up just a little bit. Not much, just a few points. I can fine tune. Any of these adjustments are absolutely, completely editable. We haven't done one thing that is destructive editing. Everything is non-destructive editing. And there we go. We've created our first composite using type, adding an image, controlling the visibility and blending with our layer mask, and then our tone and color with clipping mask controlled adjustment layers. Okay, and one final adjustment I'd like to show you here is one other non-destructive editing tool, and this is using filters on smart layers, and so using smart filters to adjust anything we want to. In this case, I want to adjust this layer right here with a smart filter. And what I want to adjust here is this edge. This boat has very nice contrast, but the edges are a little bit harder than I would like. So what I'd like to do is just kind of overall soften this image, take out some of the hard edges of the clouds and take out some of the hard edges of the boat by applying a softening filter. All right, and to do this, I come up underneath the filter menu here, and I'm going to go down to blur, and I'm going to go to Gaussian blur. Now, notice that see this convert for smart filters is grayed out. Why? Because we already have a smart layer. All right, and this is going to, because normally if you don't have a smart layer and you just apply a filter, boom, it's done, and it's destructive editing. But because we already have a smart layer here, when we come underneath the blur and we choose a blur function, in this case I'm going to go with Gaussian blur, all right? Notice that this is going to add this blur function as a smart filter, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. But first, what I want to do is I want to zoom in on a portion of my image here, all right? And then space bar to go to the hand grabber. I'm going to watch this, and I'm going to turn on my preview, and I'm going to watch what happens to this. Here's without the preview. That's with the preview. Now, normally, I think the default value here is a one pixel radius, a blur, and notice before and after, before and after. All right, so I can turn on the preview and then go, you know, that's a bit too much. So I'm just going to use my down arrow and watch what happens to the radius value. All right, I can set it manually, or I can just down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, and I can watch on screen in real time because I have my preview turned on to what it looks like. So I'm going to go 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, go up to 0.4. There, I get just the softness that I want, and I can turn the preview off and on. So I'm just applying a little bit of Gaussian blur. Maybe I want a 0.3. That's enough. That's good. And then I can go, remember, Command 0, and then Command minus to bring the image into the video screen to control the overall view of the image so I can see what that looks like in the whole image. So I soften everything just a little bit using this Gaussian blur, and notice it gets applied as a smart filter. So that at any point I can either turn that filter off or on, or I can come underneath here, I can double click on Gaussian blur, and I can re-edit it. Again, one more non-destructive editing tool. All right, so, and we're done now with creating and editing and controlling our composite. Yeah, now that we're done creating and editing our composite, I'd just like to introduce you to one more thing that's going to save you lots of time, and that is creating your own custom workspace. Notice we've done this entire project, right? Adding type, adding an image, adjusting that image. We've done it all through the layers panel and the properties panel, right? So we had our fundamental tool set up here, which we use for creating type and adding type. Then we use a layers panel or properties panel. Boom, that's it. That's all we've needed for creating this. And if this is what we like, and if we like this orientation of these panels and where they all kind of sit on the page, look what I can do. I can go up underneath window here, and I can go to workspace, and there's a bunch of workspaces built in here. 3D, motion, painting, photography, graphic, and web. Experiment with those. I'll take a look at what's there. Notice I've got one called color correction that I use, a set of panels that I use that includes histograms and info panel. I've also created one called composite, and that's what we've got right here. All right. So if you like the arrangement and the panels that you've got, you can create your own custom workspace by just coming down on the window, workspace, and go new workspace. All right. And we'll just call this TAS composite. I can say, yeah, I created some keyboard shortcuts. I want those included. If I change my menus, which I can do, I want those included. And do I want the toolbar? Yes. All right. So I want to include everything that I've created or edited, and then I'm going to click Save. And then at any time when I want to have the same workspace, I can come up down here and choose, TAS composite, and it'll bring up these panels and tools, and everything's going to be set up just the way it is now. So very, very handy way to set up your workspace, control your workspace, and I only end up with the tools that I need. I don't have to have all those panels up there. I've done everything that I need to do to control type, to place images, control images, and adjust them with just the layers panel, the properties panel, and the primary tool set over here. All right, so there we go. So just a quick review. Remember, you can control Photoshop through menus and panels, but mostly you can do it through panels. And remember that for what we did here, just to review, we used every single one of our tools that we applied here, we applied non-destructively, whether it was the type, the layer effects, adding the image, we placed the image as a smart object, and we apply it as a smart object. We dimensionally change that without any loss of image quality at all. Then we use a layer mask, completely editable, to control visibility and blending. We use clipping mask controlled adjustment layers to adjust the tone and the color of the image. And then we use a smart filter, which we applied to the smart layer, which automatically applied it as a smart filter, which again, we can turn off, we can turn on, we can edit it at any time in the future. So all of this is redoable, re-editable. And remember, we saved this all as a Photoshop file, and then we would save this out as export this as a TIFF or as a JPEG, or create a copy and flatten it, but never ever flatten the only copy you have of this file. This is a file you always want to go back to. So anyway, there's how to work in Photoshop, how to navigate around, and some of the really key fundamental tools for creating and working with composites in Photoshop. And listen, as I previously mentioned, I've covered a lot of ground in this video. My intent has been primarily to show you first and foremost how to navigate and use Photoshop. Secondly, to introduce you to the all-important concept of non-destructive editing. And thirdly, to show you some of the fundamental tools and techniques you'll be using for creating and editing composite images in Photoshop in this class and beyond. Listen, don't worry if you don't fully understand how to use all the tools and techniques that you've seen here and perform all of the editing functions. As you progress through the course, these tools and editing techniques will become clearer and more familiar to you. And as your knowledge base grows, I would encourage you to return to this video and review the tools and workflows that we've discussed here. In fact, you might want to watch it again right now just to kind of cement some of this in your head, because this is a great workflow in Photoshop and a good set of tools. Well, in closing, I hope this Intro to Photoshop video helps whet your creative appetite for working in Photoshop to create some amazing images and designs, and I'm looking forward to seeing them.